Nob Gorgrim Faceripper stood atop the scrap heap that served as his command post, squinting through his bionic eye at the darkening sky. The eye had been installed after a disagreement with an Eldar ranger about who owned a particular pile of scrap. The ranger had made some good points with his long rifle, but Gorgrim had made better ones with his power claw. The bionic eye painboy Grotsnag had bolted into the resulting hole could switch between normal vision and something Grotsnag called extra purple vision that nobody understood, but made everything look properly orky. "Oi, Metalface," he bellowed at his second biggest boy, his voice carrying that particular Rustgob growl that marked him as a proper hard lad, who'd survived more scraps than most orcs had fingers to count them on. "What's all dat den, you dozy git? Looks like something having a right old scrap up there." Metalface lumbered over, his massive frame a testament to orc physiology and the nutritional value of squig meat. Half his face was metal now. Acid had melted most of Metalface's original face off, but Grotsnag had fixed that with what looked suspiciously like metal from a cooking pot. The sky above Rustgob's reach writhed with purple-black clouds that weren't clouds at all. They moved against the wind, coiling and writhing with purpose. Mycetic spores began to fall, at first just a few, like the opening drops of rain that warned of the storm to come. Then more and more, until the sky was thick with them, each one screaming through the atmosphere with a sound that made even hardened orcs feel a bit queasy. "Looks like bugs, boss." Metalface scratched his massive green head with a power claw that sparked dangerously, sending little jolts of electricity dancing across his scarred scalp. The claw had been upgraded by Big Mech Rustgob, who believed that everything was better with more electricity. Big uns, too. Proper big. Bigger than that time we found them oversized roaches in Grotbag's kitchen, and those were the size of me arm. Gorgrim's scarred face split into a tusked grin. "Bugs, zoggin' bugs from the sky." He grabbed his favorite shooter, a monstrosity of welded barrels he called Dakamaka, kissing it like it was his favorite squig. "We's got ourselves a scrap." The ramshackle settlement erupted into beautiful chaos. The alarm was less a siren, and more a grot being hit repeatedly with a stick near a microphone. His screams amplified through speakers salvaged from an Imperial Voxcaster. Gretchens ran screaming in every direction, some toward the fight, some away from it, most just running because everyone else was. One particularly confused grot ran in circles until he got dizzy and fell over, then got up and started running in squares instead. Boys poured out of their scrap huts like green water from a broken dam. These weren't disciplined soldiers, these were orcs, and their idea of battle preparation was grabbing the nearest weapon and the second nearest in case the first one broke. One boy emerged wielding a stop sign he'd sharpened into a crude spear. Another had strapped so many stick bombs to himself that he clinked when he walked. A third was carrying what appeared to be another, smaller orc as a club, though the smaller orc didn't seem to mind and was in fact cheering. The first mycetic spore hit the ground, crushing 3 shanties and a still that had been producing something that could have doubled as promethium in a pinch. The still's owner watched his life's work disappear under alien biomass and responded in the only way an orc could, by charging at it with his chopper raised, screaming about the waste of good grog. The spore cracked open with wet, organic sounds that made several orcs go, "Caw, that's disgusting," before charging toward it with weapons raised. From within emerged hormagaunts, dozens of them, their bodies perfectly evolved killing machines. They were fast, lethal, and utterly unprepared for what they encountered. The first hormagaunt to emerge took a chopper to the face. The blow didn't kill it, Tyranids being remarkably resilient, but it did confuse it long enough for 3 other boys to pile on top of it, hitting it with various implements, including but not limited to a shovel, a piece of pipe with nails in it, and what appeared to be a taxidermied squig being used as a flail. "Look at the size of dem teeth," roared Iron Teeth the Biter, a boy known for his dental obsession and his collection of teeth from every species he'd fought. His own teeth had been replaced with metal ones. Before anyone could stop it, a hormagaunt leaped onto his face, its scything talons seeking soft spots in his thick skull. Iron Teeth's response was to bite down hard on the creature's leg, his steel teeth shearing through chitin and flesh with a sound like scissors cutting through wet leather. "Tastes like Zog," he announced through a mouthful of ichor, before headbutting the creature so hard both of them saw stars. Across the settlement, the battle was spreading like a green and purple wildfire. More spores were landing every second, each one disgorging fresh horrors. Warriors emerged, larger and more intelligent than the gaunts. One fired a stream of maggots that burrowed into flesh on contact. Another wielded bone swords that could cleave through ceramite. They moved with coordinated precision, their actions guided by the invisible will of the hive mind. The orcs met them with coordinated imprecision, which was somehow more effective. Where the Tyranids moved as one, the orcs moved as 30 organisms, all trying to kill the same thing in different ways. A warrior found itself simultaneously being shot at, chopped at, bitten, set on fire, and hit with a kitchen sink that someone had torn out of a wall for reasons that probably made sense at the time. Big Mech Rustgob emerged from his workshop, covered in oil, grease, and what appeared to be someone else's blood. Though knowing Rustgob it could have been his own, and he just hadn't noticed yet. His workshop was a cathedral to dangerous engineering, filled with half-completed projects that occasionally exploded for no reason. "Boss! Boss!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of combat and the thing he was dragging, which was making a noise like a buzzsaw. "I've been working on something special, been saving it for when we needed some extra dakka." "Save it for when we need it most, you daft sod," Gorgrim replied, ducking as a bioplasma bolt sizzled over his head, leaving a trail of melted air. He raised Dakamaka and returned fire, the weapon bucking in his hands like an angry grox. Meanwhile, Wurzag the Weirdboy was having what could charitably be called an episode. The psychic presence of the hive mind was pressing against his consciousness, like someone trying to force a square peg into a round hole using a sledgehammer. His head felt like it was full of angry wasps that were also on fire and possibly drunk. Wurzag groaned, green energy crackling around him uncontrollably. Reality in his immediate vicinity was developing a nervous twitch. A passing Hormagaunt suddenly found itself turned inside out, which even by Tyranid standards was unpleasant. Another Gaunt charging at him suddenly forgot which way was up and began attacking the ground with considerable enthusiasm. "Pull yourself together, you git," shouted Gorgrim as he ran past, using Dakamaka as a club to beat a warrior's head in. The gun was still firing, which added an element of randomness to the beating that everyone except the warrior appreciated. "We need that brain of yours working, not exploding." "Easy for you to say," Wurzag replied. "You ain't got the entire Zoggin bug network trying to eat your thoughts." The Weirdboy's distress was having an effect on the local warp space. The Immaterium, always thin on orc worlds, was starting to notice the commotion. In the warp, Gork and Mork looked up from their eternal brawl and noticed their boys were having a proper fight without them. This would not stand. A pack of gene stealers emerged from the shadows of a collapsed warehouse, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. They had infiltrated ahead of the main force, hiding in the settlement's dark corners, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They met Nob Grimskull and his mob of Ard boys, orcs who had survived so many battles that they developed a casual relationship with death that bordered on the intimate. Grimskull himself was more scar tissue than skin at this point. His body a roadmap of violence that included several wounds that should have been fatal, but which he'd ignored out of spite. "Come on then, you purple gits," roared Grimskull, wielding a power claw in one hand and a looted chainsword in the other. The chainsword had been taken from a space marine who'd made the mistake of dying where Grimskull could see him. It was too small for the knob's massive hand, looking more like a knife, but it made satisfying noises when it hit things. The lead gene stealer's response was to move faster than anything that size had a right to, its claws whistling through the air with a sound. Grimskull's response was to tank the hit with his face, leaving what would generously be called scratches, but which Grimskull would later insist were just disagreements with his skin. The knob grabbed the gene stealer with his power claw, the energy field crackling as it met the creature's chitinous hide. With his other hand, he revved the chainsword and began using the gene stealer as a weapon against its broodmates. "This one's still wriggling," he announced cheerfully, as the gene stealer's claws accidentally decapitated another of its kind. "Makes it more fun. It's like the weapon's trying to help." The battle was spreading throughout the settlement now. Painboy Grotsnag had set a medical station, but what was actually just a tarp thrown over some crates with a sign that said, "Fixin' shop, no refunds." He was currently performing field surgery on a boy who'd lost most of his internal organs to a ravner that had burst from the ground, like the universe's angriest gopher. "Don't you worry, lad," Grotsnag said cheerfully, elbow deep in the orc's chest cavity, which was making sounds that chest cavities shouldn't make. "I'll have you right as rain. Just need to stuff some gubbins back in there. Oi, Grot, bring me those spare bits." "Which spare bits, boss?" the Grot assistant asked, looking at a pile of organs that definitely came from different orcs and possibly squigs. "All of 'em. We'll see what fits. And grab that staple gun while you're at it. The big one. The one we use for fixing the trucks." The patient looked down at what was happening to his inside. "Doc, is that a squig one you're putting in me?" Might be 3 squig livers. Hard to tell really, everything's a bit purple today on account of all the bug blood. But hey, more organs means stronger, right? I dunno. Exactly. Now shut your gob and bite this stick while I attach this. I think it's a spleen, could be a kidney, might be a small brain. We'll find out. If you start thinking extra thoughts, let me know. The ground beneath the settlement began to shake. A deep rumbling that suggested something very large and very angry was about to make an appearance. The remaining grots stopped running around in panic. Even the Tyranid seemed to pause, their alien minds recognizing that something significant was about to happen. The Carnifex erupted from beneath the settlement's squig pens in a shower of dirt, confused squigs, and what had once been a fence. The living battering ram surveyed the battlefield with 4 eyes that held nothing but hunger and the kind of focused malevolence that had been refined over millions of years of directed evolution. Its massive claws could tear through tank armor, its bioplasma could melt rockcrete, and its thick carapace could shrug off anti-tank weapons. "Now dat," said Gorgrim with genuine appreciation, pausing to reload Dakamaka with his special ammunition, "is a proper big bug. Look at the size of that thing. It's beautiful, in a horrible, wants to eat us all kind of way." The Carnifex's answer was a bioplasma blast that vaporized 6 boys and left a crater of glass where they'd been standing. The surviving orcs looked at the crater, looked at the Carnifex, then looked at each other. There was a moment of silence that lasted exactly as long as it took for an orc to process what had just happened. "Right," said Metalface, testing the weight of his power claw. "That thing just turned Bogrot and his mob into nothing." "Less than nothing," corrected another boy, peering at the glass crater. "There's just shadows on the ground now, like they got turned into really flat paintings." "That's pretty impressive," admitted a third, scratching his head with a chopper in a way that probably wasn't safe. They considered this for exactly 2 more seconds. They charged as one green tide with a mighty warg, because in the orc mind, anything that could vaporize 6 boys in one shot was clearly worth fighting. The logic was impeccable if you were an orc, and completely insane if you were literally anyone else in the galaxy. The Carnifex, for all its bioengineered intelligence, seemed genuinely confused. Most species ran away from it. These green things were running toward it, and they seemed happy about it. Rustgob chose this moment to unveil his special project. It was essentially a plasma cannon he'd borrowed from an abandoned Imperial outpost and then improved by adding more barrels, removing all the safety features, and connecting it to a power source that was definitely not approved by the Adeptus Mechanicus and might have actually been a small nuclear reactor he'd found and thought looked about right. "Stand clear," he shouted, though nobody was standing particularly close anyway, because being near Rustgob when he was tested had a poor survival rate. "Firing me megaplasmadaka cannon." The Biotitan's armored carapace cracked like an egg hit with a sledgehammer. Ichor sprayed in all directions, but it didn't die. Its flesh began regenerating immediately, tendrils of new growth spreading across the wounds like time-lapse footage of fungus growing, if fungus was made of meat and hatred. "It's healing itself," shouted someone from the back. "That's cheating, that is." "No such thing as cheating in a scrap," Gorgrim replied philosophically, charging directly at the wounded Carnifex. "Only winning and not winning, and sometimes drawing, but that's boring, so we don't talk about it." He jammed Dakamaka directly into one of the creature's eyes, the barrel disappearing into the organ with a wet squelch. "Say hello to my shooty friend," he roared, pulling the trigger and holding it down. The gun fired continuously, each shot traveling directly into the Carnifex's brain. The creature's roar turned into something like a scream, then something like a gurgle, then nothing at all as it toppled backward with an earth-shaking crash. "That's how you do it," Gorgrim shouted, covered in ichor and grinning like he just won the lottery, if the lottery prize was being covered in alien blood. "You got to get personal with 'em. Show 'em you care." The battle raged on through the night. Waves of Tyranids kept coming, each one adapted slightly differently as the hive mind processed information about its opponents. Hormagaunts with thicker skulls to resist being hit with improvised weapons. Warriors with redundant organs to survive being shot multiple times. Gargoyles that had learned to fly erratically to avoid the surprisingly accurate rock throwing of angry Gretchens. As dawn broke over the devastated settlement, something strange began to happen. The Tyranid assault, instead of pressing its advantage, began to falter. The synaptic creatures directing the swarm were moving erratically, their psychic link to the greater hive mind flickering like a candle in a storm. Unknown to the orcs, the splinter fleet had entered a region of space where reality itself was thin, where warp storms raged just beneath the surface of real space. The planet sat in a pocket of relative calm, but the surrounding space was a maelstrom that cut the Tyranids off from the greater hive fleet. Without the guiding intelligence of the distant hive mind, the Tyranids fell back on instinct. The lesser creatures became confused and disorganized. Some wandered off into the wasteland. Others turned on each other, their biological imperatives conflicting without the unifying will to guide them. One Hormagaunt was seen trying to eat a destroyed truck, its instincts telling it to consume, but its limited intelligence unable to distinguish between biological and mechanical matter. Gorgrim stood atop the corpse of the Carnifex, surveying the battlefield. The settlement was in ruins, more so than usual. Half the boys were dead or wounded, though the wounded were already queuing up at Grotsnag's medical station, where the pain buy was offering buy one organ replacement, get one free deals. The survivors were already looting the Tyranid corpses, pulling off claws and teeth as trophies or potential weapons. "We won," Metalface said, limping over with one arm hanging uselessly at his side and a gaunt claw embedded in his shoulder. "Course we won," Gorgrim replied, watching the surviving Tyranids retreat into the wasteland. "We're still here, ain't we? And most of the bugs ain't. That's winning in my book. Plus, look at all this salvage. Buzzgob's gonna have a field day." Indeed, Big Mac Buzzgob was already examining Tyranid corpses with the eye of someone who saw biological weapons and thought, "I could make that shooty." He was particularly interested in a warrior's venom cannon, poking at it with a stick and making notes that consisted mainly of crude drawings and the word boom, written in various sizes. "Boss," Buzzgob called out, dragging over what looked like a Hormagaunt's scything talon that he'd already started bolting mechanical bits to. "I got an idea. These bug claws are dead sharp, right? What if we took 'em, added some dakka, maybe a motor to make 'em go roundy-round?" "You want to make weapons out of the bug bits?" Gorgrim asked, intrigued. "Not just weapons, boss, armor too. Look at this." He held up a piece of Carnifex carapace. "This stuff's dead hard, harder than most of the scrap we use. We kill the bugs, we take their bits, we make ourselves stronger. But they're dead, right? Proper dead. Not gonna start wiggling or growing or doing weird bug things. Dead as dead can be, boss. But just to be sure, I'll bolt some extra mechanical gubbins to 'em. Nothing stays dead with enough electricity running through it, but it also doesn't cause problems if it's got enough bolts in it." 3 days passed in relative peace, if you could call orcs rebuilding their settlement with no regard for safety regulations or structural integrity peaceful. The walls were rebuilt higher and thicker, reinforced with Tyranid carapace plates, that had been thoroughly cleaned and bolted to metal frames. New weapon emplacements were constructed, including something Rustgob called a biodaka thrower that was essentially a warrior's weapon symbiote that had been killed, hollowed out, and turned into a cannon that fired whatever you shoved into it. The orcs also discovered something interesting. The Tyranid corpses, when left in the sun, attracted more Tyranids. Not immediately, but the pheromone trails, the psychic death screams preserved in the warp-touched atmosphere, they all served as a beacon. The planet itself was becoming a trap, drawing in splinter fleets like moths to a flame that punched back. "Boss, boss!" a commando shouted, out of breath and covered in dust. "They're coming back." "The bugs?" Gorgrim asked, though he was already grinning because he suspected the answer. "Different ones this time, bigger ones. There's this one that's the size of a gargant, and it's got more guns than a bad moon's dream. And that's not all. What else could there be? There's stuff in the sky, rocks incoming, lots of them." Other boys heard about our scrap. The grin somehow got wider, threatening to split Gorgrim's face in half, which given orc physiology wasn't entirely impossible. "Other boys, coming here, for our fight." "Looks like it, boss." Word spread fast. Every warband in the sectors heard about the endless scrap on Rustgob's reach. Gorgrim's warg echoed across the settlement, immediately picked up by every orc within hearing distance. "Sound the alarms. Wake up to boys. It's crumpin' time." The first rock hit the ground, carving a furrow through the wasteland that would later become a river when the rainy season came, assuming the planet survived that long. The rock was typical orc engineering, a hollowed-out asteroid with engines strapped to it and the vague hope that it would land right way up. It didn't, but that had never stopped orcs before. From the inverted rock emerged Warboss Grimlug Deathclaw of the Goths. Grimlug stood 15 feet tall and was proportioned like someone had tried to build an orc, but kept adding more orc until they ran out, and had to use some spare orcs they had lying around. His armor was made from what looked like an entire land raider, hammered into shape by someone who understood armor in theory, but thought aesthetics was something you caught from not washing properly. "Oi, which one of you gits is in charge of dis scrap?" "That be me," Gorgrim said, stepping forward. Despite being significantly smaller than Grimlug, he showed no fear. After all, he'd been fighting Tyranids for days. Another orc was just a different flavor of violence, like choosing between being hit with a hammer or a wrench. Both hurt, but in slightly different ways. "You're the git what's been having all the fun with the bugs?" Grimlug asked, sizing up Gorgrim. "Fun? We've been having the time of our lives. The bugs come, we crump 'em, they come back bigger, we crump 'em harder. It's beautiful. It's like they want us to kill them, but they're too polite to ask directly. Sounds like my kind of party. The boys and me came as soon as we heard. Brought friends, too." More rocks were landing now, each one disgorging hundreds of orcs from different clans. Evil sunts emerged in red vehicles, despite the laws of physics suggesting otherwise. Their war boss, Zagdaka, immediately began organizing races through the settlement ruins, because if you were going to fight, you might as well get there quickly. Bad Moons waddled out laden with more daka than sense, their teeth gleaming gold in the morning sun. They brought weapons that defied description, mainly because trying to describe them would require inventing new words for excessive firepower. One Bad Moon had a gun so large he needed 3 grots just to help him carry the ammunition. Death Skulls emerged, already looting everything that wasn't nailed down and working on the things that were. Within minutes, they'd stripped half a ruined building and were arguing about who got to keep the particularly nice door they'd found. Their war boss, Graka Bluefist, was already eyeing the Tyranid corpses with the calculating gaze of someone trying to figure out how to turn biological weapons into teeth. Even a small contingent of blood axes arrived, setting up in organized formations that made the other orcs slightly uncomfortable. They had actual tactics and camouflage that wasn't just hope they don't see us. Their leader, Commando Nob Snagger, immediately began setting up defensive positions that actually made sense, which was so unorky that several boys accused them of being almost like Humies, though not loud enough for the blood axes to hear. "How many boys did you bring?" Gorgrim asked, watching as the green tide continued to pour from the rocks. Grimlug laughed. Every boy who could hold a chopper and wanted a proper scrap must be. Oh, I dunno, lots. A mech boy with a counting grot, a particularly clever gret, did some quick math. About 10,000, boss. Give or take 1,000. 10,000 boys. Gorgrim's eyes went wide with joy. And the bugs? Oh, yeah, Grimlug said casually, pulling out a telescope that was just a tube with glass at both ends and pointing it at the horizon. They're coming too. Saw 'em on the way in. Another splinter fleet, drawn by all the death pheromones or something. Looked right angry. Should be here in about. Now. The horizon exploded with movement. This second Tyranid wave wasn't like the first probing attack. This was a proper invasion force, a splinter fleet that had been drawn to the psychic death screams of its predecessor. Warriors marched in phalanxes, their weapons symbiotes ready. Carnifexes moved in packs, their footsteps shaking the ground in rhythm. Clouds of gargoyles darkened the sky like a plague of very angry, very toothy locusts. And behind them all, rising like a mountain given terrible life, stood a Hierophant Bio-Titan. The creature was a walking cathedral of destruction, its massive scything talons capable of cutting through fortress walls like paper. Biocannons, the size of battle tanks, protruded from its carapace. Its every step left craters that would become ponds when it rained. Now that's more like it, Grimlug roared, hefting a combi weapon. It had barrels pointing in slightly different directions, which Grimlug claimed was intentional because you can hit more things that way. The combined wag of 10,000 orcs was something to behold. It was the kind of sound that made the Tyranid synapse creatures experience what in any other species might be called doubt, but in bioengineered killing machines was more like a recalculation of threat assessment. The two forces met in the middle of what had once been the settlement's market district and was now about to become a monument to excessive violence. Orcs and Tyranids smashed into each other. Meanwhile, Big Mech Rustgob had been busy, very busy. With the arrival of reinforcements came more mech boys, and mech boys working together were like giving dynamite to pyromaniacs who just discovered fire and thought it needed to be bigger. They'd gathered in what Rustgob generously called his workshop, but was really just a crater with some tools scattered around it. All right, listen up. Rustgob addressed his fellow mechs, who were already eyeing each other's equipment with the calculating gaze of orcs trying to figure out what they could borrow. We got bugs the size of buildings. We need something proper big to crump 'em with. How big? Asked Mech Rustgob of the evil Sunts, who was already welding rockets to something that might have been a medical gurney. Bigger than big, orcmungously big. So big that when other things see it, they say that's big and then run away. So, we build a gargant, suggested another mech who was missing most of his fingers and had replaced them with smaller tools. Not just any gargant. We take all the stomper parts we brought, all the salvage from the last fight, and we build the biggest, shootiest, crumpiest gargant ever. We'll call it the World Breaker. The other mechs looked at each other. In any other species, this would have required months of planning and design. The orcs gave it about 30 seconds of thought. That's, Rustgob started. Insane, another mech suggested. Brilliant, they all shouted together, because in orc engineering, insane and brilliant were synonyms. What followed was 12 hours of the most dangerous engineering project in the sector. Salvaged stomper parts were welded together with complete disregard for compatibility or structural integrity. Power systems were connected in ways that would have caused a tech priest to spontaneously combust from sheer heresy. Weapons were added wherever they would fit and several places where they wouldn't. The paint job alone took 60 gallons of paint. Red to make it go faster, blue because it's lucky, and yellow paint because they had some left over and it seemed a waste not to use it. The end result stood 150 feet tall, had approximately 40 weapons. They kept losing count because Grots kept adding more when no one was looking, and was held together by the power of welding. And when it took its first step, the ground shook for miles around. Fire everything, Rustgob screamed from the primary control throne, which was actually a toilet they'd found and bolted controls to, because it already had a seat. The World Breaker opened fire with every weapon simultaneously. The barrage was visible from orbit, a column of destruction that connected the ground to the sky like a pillar of explosive enthusiasm. The Hierophant Bio-Titan that had been advancing on the settlement took the full brunt of the barrage. Its bioshields flared and failed. Chunks of its carapace were blown away, revealing the pulsing organs beneath. But the Hierophant was not alone. Two more emerged from the Tyranid swarm, their massive forms moving with surprising grace for something that violated every principle of the square cube law. They fired their biocannons in unison, streams of bioplasma and living ammunition that struck their Worldbreaker with enough force to stagger the massive construction. Inside the Gargant, orcs were thrown around like dice in a cup. Several grots fell out of windows. One mech was electrocuted by his own control panel, but kept working because he was too excited to notice. "She's holding together," Rustgob shouted, which was optimistic given that several important-looking parts had just fallen off. "Keep firing, all guns, even the ones that aren't working." On the ground, the battle had become a meat grinder of epic proportions. The sheer number of orcs meant that the Tyranids' usual tactics were met with equal and opposite overwhelming force. For every boy that fell, two more seemed to take his place, drawn from the rocks that kept landing as word of the epic scrap spread through the warp. Warboss Grimlug was in his element, leading from the front as all good warbosses did. He'd already killed 3 Carnifexes and was working on a 4th, using tactics that he called hitting it until it stops moving. His armor was so covered in ichor that some boys had started calling him the Purple Boss, which he took as a compliment. The Swarmlord made its appearance as the battle reached its crescendo. The ultimate Tyranid, reborn countless times with the accumulated knowledge of every battle it had ever fought, strode through the melee like death given form and a really bad attitude. Its 4 bone sabers moved in perfect harmony, each strike calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. It found itself facing Grimlug. The 2 warriors faced each other across a field of corpses, sizing each other up with the professional interest of apex predators recognizing a worthy opponent. The duel that followed was less a graceful dance of death, and more like 2 freight trains made of meat and anger colliding repeatedly. The Swarmlord's bone sabers moved in perfect patterns, each strike part of a strategy refined over countless battles. Grimlug's fighting style was to hit everything until something worked. "You're pretty good," Grimlug admitted, parrying 2 bone sabers with his power claw while taking a third to the shoulder that would have killed anything with a normal nervous system. "Almost as good as me." The Swarmlord's response was to impale Grimlug through the chest with its 4th saber, the bone blade punching through his armor. Grimlug looked down at the blade protruding from his torso with interest rather than alarm. "Oh, that's a good one," he said conversationally. "But you made one mistake." He grabbed the blade with his free hand, preventing the Swarmlord from withdrawing it. "You got close enough for me to hit you." He brought his power claw down on the Swarmlord's head with enough force to crack a mountain. The Swarmlord's skull began to fracture, its perfect killing mind suddenly experiencing something very much like panic. It tried to withdraw, but Grimlug held it fast. "Oh no, you don't. You started this fight. We're gonna finish it." The Swarmlord's body began to break down, its connection to the hive mind flickering. In its last moments, it sent a psychic scream across the battlefield, calling for aid. But the hive mind was distant, cut off by the warp storms that surrounded the planet. The Swarmlord died, truly died, its accumulated knowledge lost to the void. "Boss!" Doc Grotsnag ran up, medical bag in hand. "You've got a sword through you." "I noticed," Grimlug said, looking at the bone saber still embedded in his chest. "But look at this." He held up the Swarmlord's busted head. "I got its head. Think we can mount this on der Worldbreaker?" "Probably, but shouldn't we deal with the sword first?" "Nah, leave it in. It's holding my insides inside, plus it looks proper intimidating." Meanwhile, the Worldbreaker was engaged in a titanic battle with the 3 Hierophants. The Gargant's weapons fired continuously, its massive power claws swinging at anything that got close. One Hierophant had already lost 2 legs and was dragging itself forward, still fighting despite being essentially dead. Inside the control throne, Rustgob was having the time of his life. Half the Gargant was on fire, The other half was falling apart, and something that might have been the primary power core was making a noise like a dying squig. "This is perfect," he shouted. "Everything's going exactly like planned." He pulled a lever marked, "Definitely do not pull ever," and a world breaker's chest opened up, revealing a weapon so insane that even other orcs hadn't wanted to help build it. It was essentially a teleporter accident waiting to happen, designed to grab a chunk of space and swap it with another chunk of space, specifically a chunk of space from inside a sun. "Fire the swap gun." Where the lead Hierophant had been standing, there was suddenly a sphere of solar plasma. The Bio-Titan didn't so much die as cease to exist in any meaningful way. Its atoms vaporized. When the light faded, there was a perfectly spherical crater where the Hierophant had been, the edges turned to glass. The other two Hierophants, despite being bioengineered killing machines with no concept of fear, took a step back. "Again! Again!" Rustgob screamed, but the swap gun had melted. The battle raged for 3 more days. The Tyranids kept coming, drawn by the psychic death screams of their fallen. More orc rocks kept arriving, as word spread through the warp that Rustgob's reach was the place to be for a proper scrap. Finally, as the sun set on the 3rd day, the Tyranid assault began to falter again. The constant deaths, the severed connection to the hive mind, the sheer impossibility of their opponents, it all combined to break the swarm's cohesion. The surviving creatures retreated into the wasteland, their instincts telling them to regroup, to evolve, to come back stronger. Gorgrim stood atop Der Worldbreaker's head, which had fallen off during the battle, but was still technically the highest point around. He surveyed the battlefield with satisfaction. The ground was carpeted with corpses of both species. Orcoid spores were already beginning to spread, while Tyranid biomass seeped into the soil. In a few weeks, both would grow back, ready for another round. "You know what, boys?" he called out to anyone listening. "I think we've found paradise. Endless fighting, no worrying about winning or losing because there's always another fight tomorrow. It's perfect." "What if we run out of bugs?" Metalface asked, now sporting a new arm that Grotsnag had attached, a Carnifex claw that had been thoroughly killed and mechanized. "Look around." Gorgrim gestured to the wasteland, where Tyranid organisms were already beginning to be created by Norn queens and biomass pools. "They're cut off from their big fleet by all them warp storms. They can't leave, and neither can we. They grow back, and we meet in the middle for another scrap. So, we're stuck here forever, fighting over and over." "Exactly, isn't it great?" And so it continued. The planet became locked in an eternal cycle of warfare. The warp storms that surrounded it kept both factions trapped, but neither minded. The orcs had found their paradise, an enemy that would never stop coming, getting bigger and meaner each time. Every few months, the cycle would complete. The Tyranids would consume enough biomass to launch another assault. New orc spores would mature into boys ready for battle. The two forces would meet in apocalyptic battles that reshaped the landscape each time.